pause, and I will get going.
That's going in the recording.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 78 of the Solo Source podcast. I'm Michael Eckenfels.
And I'm the past version of Martin Gonzalez.
Oh boy, here we go. And today on the show, let me do this one again. Actually, hold on. I'm kind of let me say a little bit of the background of the game here. Okay.
You just want to do the whole thing again.
Sorry.
Nah, it's all good, man. That's the magic of audio. Sorry, my bad.
That's right. Yeah, that's actually kind of funny. I'm thinking today, and then I'm sorry. Okay. I'm going to probably keep that in. That's kind of funny.
Why not?
All right. Today on the show, we will be reviewing The Shores of Tripoli. This is a light historical war game designed by Kevin Bertram and published by Fort Circle Games. It's a game for 1 to 2 players, takes about 45 to 60 minutes, and is a light to medium complexity card-driven game. A little bit on the background. This game covers a period of history where the United States is in its infancy. It's just become a country just maybe 2 decades prior, about 2 decades prior, and it's not really made its weight felt in the world yet. There's a little thing called, I forget what they're called, Tripolitanian pirates, I believe.
Right.
The pirates of the Mediterranean, essentially, who are messing around with United States shipping and just raiding ships, stealing gold, taking crews hostage, capturing ships, things like that. And they're just doing it like crazy because, hey, the United States, they're not a real power. We can mess with them, right?
They figure they can take us.
Right. Yeah, and exactly. And so Thomas Jefferson, president at the time, says, well, we're not having that, and we're sending some ships and eventually Marines over there. So that's the background. It's a very esoteric time period to cover because it's just rare. You know, it's not something you see a lot of games on, and I'm actually quite pleased to see this coverage. So the game is card driven. So each card has event text on it. So you can play it for the event, or you can discard it to do a more generic action like move naval and land units on your game board. And interestingly, each side, the U.S. and Tripolitanian. Tripolitanian. Yeah, right. There we go. See, I'm English good, I promise. Each side has its own very unique victory conditions.
Right. And as Michael mentioned, this game has a solo mode called the T-Bot. So the Tripolitanian bot. We'll just call it the T-Bot.
T-Bot. Perfect.
Now in the solo mode, you can only play as the U.S. side. You cannot play as the Tripolitanians. And the solo AI, well, as the solo player, you play your game exactly the same as in the multiplayer game, which I kind of prefer, right? Like, so essentially, to learn how to play, you only have to learn, how to play the multiplayer game, and then you can easily translate that knowledge to the setup changes for the T-Bot. For the solo mode, you basically arrange certain cards for the T-Bot in 2 rows. The top row is like the event row, and then the bottom row is like the battle card row. And then on the T-Bot's turn, you kind of check these cards in order to see if any of the requirements have been satisfied, in which case you would resolve that. Otherwise, if not, then the T-Bot essentially will either raid, if it has enough ships to raid, or will add another ship. So eventually this T-Bot is going to keep on raiding you, which is kind of like the point of what the Tripolitanians are doing. They're waging this kind of like guerrilla war of aggression against the fledgling United States, which is not quite a superpower in this game.
Right. Very good. Yep. Wow, that was the silliest commentary I could possibly make. Yep, what? Right, very good.
Wow. Well, thank you for your validation, Michael. I feel good. Because this is not really, as you know, I am not a war gamer, so I'm, treading in uncharted waters for myself. I've really only played a couple of, true war games. So, I'm dipping my toes slowly and carefully into this field.
we need to fix that. It puts the lotions on its game.
Oh boy!
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay, I feel a little funny there. I'm sorry. I'm just not that. I try to be funny sometimes. Anyway, let's continue. Hey, we got a podcast to do here, not some silly
What?
pop culture reference from
More
40 years ago.
podcasting?
Yeah, exactly. So let's have a word from our sponsor. Hey, so this podcast is brought to you by Stone Valley Games. In all aspects except for the bad jokes, Michael says. So, your friendly, distant game store is Stone Valley Games. Check them out at stonevalleygames.com. It's a great shop because most of the games over there are great for solo players. We invite you over to their site to check them out, especially because the owner, Eric, is always adding new content to the storefront. It's important to support a small family run, solo friendly game store. So, thanks again to Stone Valley Games.
Thank you, Stone Valley Games.
And we would like to do a little short new segment here called What Have You Been Playing? Just to talk a little bit about just other games that might be on our table. So, Martin, why don't you kick things off there?
What have I been playing? So, I haven't really had the mental bandwidth to play anything really or learn anything really big and heavy lately from a solo game perspective. So, the most recent game I played was Star Realms Frontiers, which is a very light deck building game, and it is soloable. It comes with 8 solo challenge bosses in the box. Are you familiar with the Star Realms, Michael?
It sounds familiar, but no, I am not.
So it's a very fast playing competitive card game, and essentially you're in command of your own space fleet. You go up against these other space fleets, and you play cards to do damage to your opponent, and also to buy new ships to upgrade your fleet's capabilities. And that's essentially it. It plays super fast, and what's exciting about it is that eventually, once you get these upgraded ships, you can start doing a lot of damage per turn, like 13, 15, 18 points of damage, and then the game could be over in one big apocalyptic blast of flame and fire. Now the solo version, which comes and starts in Frontiers, which is it's a small box, it's $20, and it's got these 8 challenge bosses, and they change the rules for each one. So basically, the solo AI cheats, is what I'm saying.
Of course it does.
to challenge you, and usually I will lose again. And so anyway, we're not really doing it in depth here, but it's just something that I put on the table and I play it when I don't want to really think about it, and I just want to like kind of enjoy myself, and yeah. So I've been having a blast with that one on my table lately. How about you? What have you been playing lately?
Well, I've been playing quite a few games. A lot of titles from a company called White Dog Games. They do solitaire only historical type war game type games. Not entirely historical, because one of my favorites of theirs right now is called Gorbachev, where
Hmm.
you play sort of as Gorbachev during the fall of the Soviet Union. So you're trying to keep the Soviet Union together peacefully as long as possible,
Hmm.
avoiding coups and other untoward events, trying to keep the Warsaw Pact together. And it's a challenge. It's not easy. And the designer R. Ben Madison, I believe is his name. He knows a lot about the Soviet Union. He visited there. He put a lot of pictures in the rule book from his visits back in that time frame, and it's just really a fascinating look in that era. If you grew up during that time
Yeah.
under the shadow of the threat of nuclear war and Gorbachev's rise to PR fame in the West, it's a really interesting look at how things work there. I've also got one called The First Jihad. I started to look at that last night, but I haven't gotten through to it too far. Let's see what else. There's another one called Mosby's Raiders, which I have on my table right now. It's a completely solitaire game from, 1985. I think it was
Hmm.
made back in
Hmm.
the day, almost as old as the Civil War. Which is funny because that's what the topic is. You're playing as a band of Confederate raiders trying to keep the Union busy and get
Hmm.
them to use resources trying to find you. It's one of my favorites of all time. The theme, of course, is probably not all that acceptable these days, but it's just a board game, and it's kind of a fun thing. And I think I've been thinking this game could do a retheme. It really could
Hmm.
be rethemed as Red Dawn, where you're playing as the Wolverines against the invading Russians. I just
Nice.
never took the time to mess with that. And there's a few other odds and ends here and there, but those are the main ones right now.
So that Gorbachev one seems very interesting to me. I'm also fascinated by that theme, and there is a dearth of like Cold War themed
Yes.
games on just around. Like I search for them sometimes on Board Game Geek. The 800-pound gorilla is of course Twilight Struggle,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is
Mm-hmm.
kind of universally acclaimed as one of the greatest games of all time. I've never actually played the physical version because it's a two-player game, and I don't have anyone in my life who would be interested in playing this with me.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes my daughter will be like, "Hey dad, you want to play a game?" And when she says that, she means I want to play a game that won't take more than 20, 30 minutes and one that I can destroy my dad completely at.
Right.
So that Twilight Struggle is out. I mean, she if she had the patience, she'd probably destroy me at it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm interested in checking out this Gorbachev one.
Yeah.
Um,
It's interesting, and I just did an unboxing article for Armchair Dragoons on it.
mhm.
I'm a writer over there. It should be coming out next week, maybe. If you're interested in checking out pictures that I took and my thoughts on the game, the map is ugly as sin. I think if you go check it out on BGG, you can look at it. It's just like, oh my gosh, it's just like this. It's this offensive mix of fonts and colors, and oh god, it's awful.
Uh-oh.
But once you get into the game, though, you don't really notice it, which is interesting. I mean, to me, it's just like this amount of color that's just thrown up on the board, and but it
Yeah.
works once you play it. It's really odd. I've never really seen that in a game. So if you ever get
Nice.
a copy of it, maybe we can cover it on the show, or maybe something similar to it, like politically themed games. There's one I've really had my eye on and I'm super excited about, and I just really wish it would get here before the end of this decade. It's called Mr. President,
Uh-huh.
the American Presidency 2001 to 2020 by
Uh-huh.
GMT. And it's a
Okay.
totally solo game where
Uh-huh.
you are the president of the United States, and you're
Okay.
dealing with hotspots in the world, and you're dealing with legislation, you're dealing with bipartisanship, you're dealing with all these things. And it just seems like a fascinating look at running the country,
Yeah.
and I don't know. I love political games. What can I say?
Yeah. Have you heard of? I know it's not a solo game, but have you heard of Watergate?
You've talked about it. I have heard of it. It's not a solo game, though. I thought it was, or it had a solo component.
No, it's a
Ah,
two-player
that's
game.
a
There
shame.
is I think a fan-made solo mode on BGG, but I don't think
Hmm.
it's very good. I mean, I can't imagine any way that you could make this a good solo experience. It's a really, really good two-player game, though. Just put that out
Right.
there. One of the
Yeah.
best I've ever played.
I got to look into that because that's interesting to me. I think I've just avoided it because of that, probably.
And
Uh,
I think I will mention Watergate in respect to our review a little later on of Shores of Tripoli.
cool. All right. Well, yeah. Speaking of, maybe we should get on with that. I don't know. We could talk for an hour about this, I think.
Is there? So that's been our newish segment called "What Have You Been Playing?" Stinger music.
Dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. That's going to be the new Stinger music. Me just
We
singing.
don't need post production anymore. We can just do it
Nope.
live. We just do it
Nope.
all live.
Yeah, there you go. For you Patreon, no, I'm just kidding. We don't have Patreon. Maybe we will one day. I don't know. But
Maybe one day.
then you can get us to sing, and that would be the perfect reason to not sign up for Patreon. So,
That's right. Yeah, people
all
would be unsigning in droves, unsubscribing in droves.
right. Is there a way we can avoid your site? That would be great. Okay, and now for some solo gaming news.
The solo news is brought to you as always by TableFor1.me, where the Solosaurus podcast exclusively gets its one-player game news. Thanks, as always, to Frederick Schultz of TableFor1.me for his ongoing efforts to bring us the solo gaming news. And really, Frederick is just a machine. He just keeps on coming up with this stuff, and it's always so well written. And you can follow his solo gaming news blog on Board Game Geek. And as always, we will place that link in the show notes. Michael, what's our first news item?
Our first one is Keystone North America, a game of card drafting and tile placement designed by Jeffrey Joyce and Isaac Vega, designer of Dead of Winter, among other games. And I have played Dead of Winter. I can say that. That's a fun game.
Yeah.
It's for 1 to 4 players who take on the roles of biologists who are trying to create interconnecting ecosystems to a wide range of wildlife. Each species, big or small, have specific criteria for types of environments that they can thrive within. And throughout the course of the game, players will try to create synergies between species that share similar environments so as to create healthy and valuable ecosystems. In addition to competitive game modes, the game will also feature a field journal, which is a fully illustrated book containing both cooperative and solo campaigns where you can solve puzzles while learning about the animals of North America. It's the crowdfunding campaign for Keystone North America is currently scheduled to launch on Kickstarter sometime in May. So, Martin, what do you think about Keystone North America?
So I have quite a few thoughts here. Number one, I too have played Dead of Winter. I've actually played it solo. It's not easy to play that game solo because it requires the default gameplay, as you know, has a lot of like hidden information
Yep.
and traitor mechanism. But it's such an evocative theme. So I'm excited to check out another game from the designer of Dead of Winter, so Isaac Vega. And so card drafting and tile placement, very interesting to me. I'm a fan of a number of drafting games like It's a Wonderful World, like Seven Wonders Duel, those types of things. So I'm interested in that mechanism. And the theme is evocative and kind of appealing to me because it reminds me of a couple of other games that I like that are also soloable. One is called Parks. I don't know if you play that one,
I've heard of
but
it.
yeah, essentially it's a really restful, calming, kind of Zen-like experience where you are just visiting national parks and taking pictures of trees and wildlife and whatever. And you would think, that it's a recipe for like I'm asleep in 10 seconds, but it's not. It's it's a really cool game. And so this theme reminds me of that. And there's a game on my table right now called Cascadia, which is an upcoming 1 to 5 player game. Again, about laying tiles and drafting wildlife tokens and then just matching them. It's kind of like a spatial matching puzzle. So it just seems to me that this type of kind of biological ecosystem, there's more games that are using these themes, and I'm a huge fan of this because it's nonviolent. It's not controversial. It has a good positive message, and I think that I am a big fan of more and more of these types of games coming out. Last thing I'll mention, Genius Games. That they are famous for coming up with kind of science-based and science-themed games. They have one on Kickstarter now. It's about cellular biology. And it looks very, very good. And they also have a game on the origin of species by Darwin, which I have played solo. And so anyway, I'm as you can tell, I'm a fan of these types of kind of science based and environmental based themed games. So I'm a big fan.
Cool. Very good.
All right, I think we have a second article here. Marvel United, the cooperative 1 to 4 player game set in the Marvel superhero universe. Right now on Kickstarter, has a standalone sequel called Marvel United X-Men, and it has utterly smashed its original funding goal of $300,000. At the time that we wrote this news article, it was at 2.7 million. It's probably a good bet that it's already exceeded that.
It has. It's at 3.6 million right now.
3.6 million. That is bananas. But
Isn't that crazy?
it is crazy. But I mean, this is from the company called CMON, Cool Minis or Not. And they are kind of famous for this type of blockbuster Kickstarter campaign. The game is designed by Andrea Chiarvesio, Eric Lang, and Francesco Rugerfred Seda. And as the title suggests, Marvel United X-Men introduces the powerful mutants and their antagonists into the fray, while simultaneously being fully compatible with the original game from last year. So in addition to the roster of heroes like Wolverine and Storm, Marvel United X-Men also introduces a new character class called the Anti-Heroes, which can be used either as antagonists or protagonists, depending on your preference. And if your fear of missing out or FOMO is causing you sleepless nights because you missed out on the last year's Marvel United Kickstarter campaign, the current CMON campaign also features a plethora of add-ons and mini expansions, otherwise called optional buys, air quotes. And they were originally introduced during the original crowdfunding campaign. So if you are, if you want to complete your collection of all of the different, optional buys for both Marvel United and Marvel United X-Men, you have the opportunity to do that on this campaign. Michael, what are your thoughts on Marvel United X-Men?
I'd not even heard of this until we started researching this for the show and you posted this here. I thought, Marvel, okay. Another Marvel game, great. That's exactly what we need because there's just not too many of those out there. And I'm looking at this, the artwork, and I'm just like, this looks like, when it looks like kids' toys. They look like there used to be this, I can't remember this line of toys. It was a Star Wars little mini figures that were like Galactic Heroes, I think they were called, and they were like caricature versions for little children to play with. And that's what it looks like. But the more I'm looking at these minis, the more I'm liking them actually. But the real thing that caught my eye was some of the old school X-Men heroes like Polaris, Longshot, Sunspot. Let's see who else we got here. Havoc and Captain Britain, and on and on and on. These are all characters I loved when I was reading X-Men back in the late 80s. I had a very brief love affair with comics back then. I stopped because they're just too darn expensive.
Right.
But that was like a golden age, the late 80s for X-Men. They had a team that I just thought was great. I mean, Rogue, Psylocke, Kitty Pryde, on and on. Yeah. I'm being a total nerd right now, but you know what I'm saying.
I'm with
you. Just from that, I'm like, this might be doable. I'm not gonna go near a Kickstarter campaign. I would be murdered in my sleep if I did that. So P500 from GMT is okay because they don't charge until the game ships, but this is, all or nothing. I think it's going to be funded at $3.7 million over their $300,000 goal.
No question there.
Right. Yeah. So it's going to get sucked up. That card's going to be gone. So I think I'll just wait till it comes out. Hey, and maybe it's something we can review for the show in the future. I wouldn't mind taking a look at it. It looks good, but it looks also like one of these completionist things where if you're a Marvel fan, you're going to want to get all of it, all the expansions.
For sure. I mean, they know what they're doing, and that's why, when they came out with the initial lineup, and by the way, the art style is called Chibi art style.
Chibi. Okay.
Yeah. So, there's kind of like a well-known style where you take the, grown-up figure and then you give them kind of childlike features, but they're still kind of like in their cool. And the miniatures themselves are that they're posed well and they're sculpted. I'm no expert, but a lot of people say, well, they're sculpted well, But the Chibi art style is very it's polarizing. It's not polarized. It's polarizing.
I can see that.
But I actually did purchase the kind of core Marvel United retail box.
Cool.
And I played it a couple of times, and I will say, it pleasantly surprised me. It's a light, fun, cooperative game, and it's really great for playing with, your younger kids. But then you might say, well, then there's really no point for me as a solo player to, play this, no challenge, whatever. Well, in the rules, there's something called the Shield True Solo mode, where you can play in a true solo mode. You select 3 heroes, you kind of mix up all of their cards, and it's a lot harder. It's a lot more challenging. I actually haven't beat it. So there is value and virtue here in the gameplay. It's not a heavy game or even a medium game by any means, but it is a good time, and it works. What can I say? It's a well-designed game. It works. So yeah.
Cool. All right. Yet another game on my radar. Thanks, Martin. Blame Martin. So finally, on Kickstarter now is a game called Stationfall, a game of hidden roles, deduction, murder, mayhem, deception, betrayal, blackmail, death, and destruction. I think that covers everything for 1 to 9 players. It sounds like a fun time, but as a solo mode, I don't know. If it's up for 9 players, it sounds like more of a party game, but hey, it'd be interesting to see how the solo mode would work on this. So it's the latest game designed by Matt Eklund, designer of PAX Transhumanity and co-designer with his father, Phil, of PAX
Yeah, you can do this. I believe in you. You can
Pax
do this. There you go.
Pax Porphyriana,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
Pax Renaissance. I can pronounce Renaissance. I pronounced that a few times. It has a complexity rating of 3.5 on BGG and has been described as a party game for heavy gamers. So there you go. Publisher Ion Games describes Stationfall like this. Imagine a dozen or so random humans, robots, and none of the aboves, each with their own abilities, goals, and secret relationships, have been turned loose on a space station that is going to be incinerated in approximately 15 minutes. You are one of these weirdos, and you have collaborators on hand ready to assist you in achieving your goals. There's also definitely, probably, some sort of alien presence or murderous monster locked up on board, maybe. Awesome. Due to the actions of your opponents, seemingly simple victory conditions may only be achievable through complex means. Stationfall is a box full of creative solutions, but that box is going to morph, twist, and grow teeth over the course of play. Your best turns will exploit the unique tactical freedom of being a secret conspiracy, as well as deductions about your opponent's identities and motives. Stationfall is messy, intricate, and full of dangerous variables. Welcome to the station. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you write marketing copy. That's a
That's
good
really
passage
good
there.
stuff. Yeah, for
Martin, what
sure.
are your thoughts on this?
Well, obviously it's extremely interesting, and like you, I too have serious questions
Yeah.
about how you take a game with hidden roles and deduction and deception and betrayal as key game mechanisms, and then kind of say, and it's going to have a solo mode, which I don't think yet exists. I've been looking at the Kickstarter page, and the the kind of blurb video, marketing video at the top says it's 1 to 9 players, but if you go to BGG, it says 2 to 9. So
Hmm.
I'm thinking that they have yet to develop the solo mode. That
Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
um, I believe the designer does have some pedigree in terms of creating solo modes. So I could be mistaken there. So it could turn out to be good. We'll see, but color me skeptical at this point. But as a concept, it is. I mean, to me, it sounds like the Steam game Among Us, but
Hmm.
for medium heavy tabletop gamers. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and the fact that if that's correct, they're saying that, hey, each game session is going to take about 15 minutes. I mean, there's that, right? Like, you could definitely put this on the table and play a couple of rounds as like a starter. A heavy, a medium heavy starter or filler game. That's kind of a weird, almost an like almost a contradiction in terms, but it's fascinating.
It
So
is.
very fascinating. Oh, and I will mention, as a for print and play, any print and play fans who are listening to the show, there is a free full color print and play version of this game available for download from the Kickstarter site. If we remember, we'll place a link to it in the show notes.
It sounds like an old role playing game called Paranoia. I don't know if
Hmm.
you know what that is.
No,
You never heard of
sorry,
it?
no.
No, no, it's okay. It's a very comedic role playing game where you play troubleshooters in service of the computer, our friend the computer, trying
Hmm.
to uh, root out and destroy communist treachery and find and identify and eliminate mutant traitors and conspirators who are part of secret societies. The only problem is everybody in Alpha Complex has a mutant power and is part of a secret society. So yeah, and each character has 6 clones, and you go through those pretty quick.
Oh
The
wow.
object of the game is not to win. It's just to see how long you can survive and at the whim of the GM. So if anybody wants to check that out, I'd suggest looking it up. I think it's actually got a 5th edition that's current right now out there. So anyway, it sounds like a good time. It really does, and I'd be really curious to see how that solo mode works.
Yeah.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the solo gaming news for this episode. Thanks always to Frederick Schultz of TableFor1.me for the news items. And now here's our review of The Shores of Tripoli. For full disclosure, to let you know, we have been provided review copies of this game from Kevin Bertram, the game designer. So let's talk about the components first. they're great. I mean, there's some really beautiful 34-inch by 11-inch game map. It's kind of an odd design because you're not used to, as a war gamer anyway. Most game maps are 22 by 34. This is about half the size tall by the same length.
Hmm.
But hey, the area it covers, which is the North African coast and part of the Mediterranean, it makes perfect sense. And
Right.
it's very simple and it's very inviting. There's wooden ships, frigates, corsairs, and gunboats. Oh my. Uh, nice touch there. That's they're meeple ships though, which is kind of weird for me. But
Yeah.
at first I was like, but then I was like, oh, this actually works. These are kind of cool. Uh, there's a bunch of wooden cubes in 3 different colors. There's 12 wooden gold coins, 2 wooden season and year markers, 2 decks of cards of about 25 each, one for the US player and one for the triple
The
for the Tripoli player.
Tripoli player. Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
terrible. It's sad too because what's funny is my mom went to high school in Tripoli
Right.
back when there
There
was
you
an
go.
U.S. Air Force base there. So you think we got a little bit of a family tied to the area. That's kind of interesting. Anyway, so the cards, 25 each, as I said, very nice linen finish, very very well done cards, top of the line kind of stuff. There's also 24 dice in 3 different colors. So as I said, my overall impression for this component is I was first taken aback by some of the pieces, but it really works for the game, I think. And you'd be surprised to find some wargamers deriding um, meeple pieces as being too simplistic. And I'm not saying that everybody does that. It's occasionally you hear somebody making fun of them. But to me, it's like, this works. This is really kind of neat, actually. Uh,
Because cardboard chits and counters are so much better? Question
well,
mark.
yeah, they are a little half-inch cardboard pieces with about 60 different numbers on them and microscopic print. That's great, man. See, you can find something wrong with anything. I think when I say you, I mean anybody could find anything wrong with this stuff. But the game it's a simple, straightforward game, and the pieces work perfectly in this regard. The card art is fantastic as well, very thematic, very very cool. And the passion that the designer has for the history really comes through in the player material. So you not only have a rule book, you've got a player book that tells you some of the history, and you've even
Hmm.
got this reprint of a letter that was written by Thomas Jefferson to the Tripolitanians.
The Tripoli people.
Oh God, those Tripoli folks, those mean old pirate guys. I am so sorry, folks. I'm terrible. I'm having a real
All
issue
good, man.
pronouncing that today.
It's part of your charm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh well, that's
You
good. I got something going for me. All right. So Martin, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. The production is, just of the whole package. I wrote it's got understated quality. That game board graphic design, the color choices, just the way it looks on the table, it really looks nice. I think the fact that all the pieces, like they made a commitment that all the pieces are going to be wood, because from my perspective, I thought it would make more sense and probably be cheaper to make the ships, more detailed, like plastic miniatures. The fact that they went with wood, I think adds to the premium feel. As a wargaming, newcomer, that's my impression. The cards themselves, they're linen finish and they feel very nice in hand. You mentioned that the card art is fantastic. The graphic design is fantastic. I mean, they placed a lot of love and effort and care into how this game looks. I could actually imagine this as kind of like something that you might keep on your coffee table. Maybe have the board kind of laid out there, and then your visitors come over and they're like, "What's that?" Well, funny you
Yeah.
should mention it, and because it's an introductory level, game with a nice little bit of history going for it, then it could be a perfect kind of conversation starter. So yeah, I think it's quite a fascinating and kind of labor of love, kind of package from a component perspective.
That's a really good point. I never would have thought of that, leaving it out like as a coffee table piece. It's simplistic enough to be a perfect centerpiece to a table or coffee table piece. That's a really good idea. Huh. Okay.
We should tell Kevin.
There you go. As far as gameplay is concerned, it's as we mentioned, card driven, Solo play, so you have your deck of cards as the US player. You're only playing from the US side. You don't play from the other side. You draw
Mhm.
6 cards per turn for yourself, and you play these cards, as I said, either as an event, and usually that's a one-time event where once you play that card, it's discarded for the rest of the game. It doesn't come back in, or not discarded, rather, it's removed from the game, I should say. And then you have cards that you can
Right.
also. Sorry, go
I
ahead.
think don't they have names for those cards? There are like key
Yes,
events that if you play them for like this very powerful event, then it gets removed for the game. But there are other like cards with events
core event
where,
cards.
oh, you play this event and then you just discard it, and then that can probably potentially you could see that card again later on. It's trying to encourage you to tell a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Um, Although there is a little bit of leeway to kind of have slightly different outcomes, different from history.
Right, exactly. It's just, yeah, that's something else we'll talk about maybe a little bit later in the rule and in the rules in the review, because while you could move around and do different things, the history more or less moves along a certain path. There's a certain things that happen, whether you win or lose. Of course, it's up to the card play and a lot of luck in there as well. But cards, event cards are core event cards, unique event cards. The United States player actually has a couple of victory event cards as well, which are played during the game at certain points in order to help the U.S. player facilitate a
Yeah.
win. There's also battle card. Sorry.
What are? I'm sorry. I don't mean to keep derailing you. What can we maybe should review? What are the U.S. victory conditions
Yeah,
again?
we could talk about that. Why not? So, victory conditions actually come in several different colors. So, the American player wins by, so there's a treaty card that comes out during play in the U.S. deck, and
Oh,
it
right.
has 4 stipulations on it. It what the 4 stipulations are certain things have to happen. So it has to be the fall of 1805 or later, because the game takes place over,
Mhm.
what is it, 1801?
6 years? Is
Yeah,
it
it's
6 years
about,
or 5
I think
years?
it's
Five
about
years.
6 years.
F- 6 years and then 4 seasons per year. So essentially, you get to do four moves
Right,
per
right.
year,
So
and
there's
there's
24
six
turns
years.
essentially
Yeah.
if you go all the way to the end of the game. So it has to be the fall of 1805 or later. So you have to get to a certain point in the game before you
Hmm.
can actually win. All 3 of Tripoli's allies, there's Morocco, Algiers, and Tunisia, who have to be at peace. In other words, you can't have any. They can't have any pieces on the board. It's considered at peace.
Yeah. No.
Right.
No
Right.
enemy
Exactly.
units there. Yeah.
The city of Dern, which is the furthest east owned city by Tripoli, has to be captured by.
I guess the point is that it's really hard to win as
Yeah,
the
so
U.S.
it is. I mean, you got to be at a certain point in the game. You have to have a certain cities captured. There's all these things that have to happen for this treaty card to be effective. You have to, like I said, all these allies have to be quiet. You have to have one of these cities captured, and there has to be no frigates in the Tripoli harbor. So, if that's all good, if that all happens, then Tripoli signs a
Then,
peace treaty, and the game's done. You're
which is exactly
right. I
what
think
happened,
so.
right? As
I
I
think
as I recall, that is what
Although I
happened
think, and I
historically.
think they actually assaulted Tripoli, because that's another way you can win by occupying Tripoli. But you have to destroy
Okay.
all their ships. You have to actually physically.
They
They
have a
have a lot of
lot of
ships, yeah,
ships.
and they can bring out frigates too. So they start with corsairs, which are just these little boats that you roll 1 die in
Yeah.
combat for. But then the frigates have 2 dice, and that's doesn't matter whose
Yeah.
side, U.S. or Tripoli side, they get 2 dice. So these big ships can be really dangerous. And then there's also little army pieces. So that's where the cubes come in. You place cubes on the map. And actually, in the solo mode, you have to place more on the map for the Tripoli player, because it makes it more of a challenge for you. So you have to clear all those out, destroy all the enemy ships, and capture Tripoli itself to win. So you got a treaty for the US side. You do that, you win. You clear out Tripoli, you also win. But it's not nearly as easy as it sounds. Right.
No, no. It just and meanwhile, if you know the AI, the Tripoli kind of AI player, all they have to do is just harass you until and take all your money,
Yep.
because you start the game with
Right.
12 gold, right? And if you lose all your gold, you
Yep.
lose.
That's
So
one way.
the cards are stacked
Yep.
against you,
Yep.
And from the get go, if you are playing this game as the U.S., which if you're playing it solo, that's the only way
Right.
you're playing it. That was kind of like my overriding, kind of hopeless feeling when I was looking at this game, and I'm like, what? I have to do all of
Right.
these things? And meanwhile, what is this guy doing his turn? Oh, he just takes your money again. Oh, he just took 4 more gold
Yep.
from you. What?
Roll those dice. You're really surprised how many fives and sixes you roll when the damn Tripoli Raiders are getting you.
Oh, yeah, we'll talk
Yeah.
about those dice a little later on.
So yeah, like
Oh,
Martin
okay.
said, that's one way to lose. You start the game with 12 gold on your side. They can raid the Tripoli player, the AI in this case, can raid and steal that gold. And if they take all 12 from you, you're done because the US just goes, okay, this costs too much. We're done. Forget it. You guys can have it.
Right.
But there's ways, I think, in the game, there's certain cards that you can play the neck. You can actually get gold back. And there's also cards where you can actually
Yes.
voluntarily give them gold in order to get stuff in return.
Gain
Right.
some other advantage.
There's a
Yeah. Yeah.
dynamic going on here. It's very interesting, but gold is very finite and it goes away quickly. My first game, I think I lost
Mm-hmm.
6 within the first year, and I was just like, "Oh man, I'm
Oh,
not going
yeah.
to win this." uh,
It is. It
right?
is
Yeah.
bananas for
So
sure.
there's another way you can lose, and that's if the Tripoli player sinks 4 of your American frigates. If that happens, it's just the U.S. decides it just costs too much in the way of military, and it's just a sinkhole. We're not going to send any more ships, and we're done. And besides, the U.S.
Yeah.
fleet wasn't all that big. So if they take out 4 frigates, that's going to be a pretty good chunk of the U.S. Navy at the time. So there's that. And then
Yeah.
also, I mentioned an army. So there's this army that can form in Alexandria, which is the furthest east space.
Mm-hmm.
And that army is called Hamet's army, and it will march on Tripoli, but
Mm-hmm.
it only does it through card play. So you got to play a card for it to march into Dern, which is the first Tripoli city. You got to play another card for it to advance into, gosh, I'm forgetting the name of the city now. Let me see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Doesn't
And then
matter.
you got to play another card for it to advance into Tripoli if you're going to do that. So if that army gets
Oh man.
destroyed, the game's over. So,
So many things have to
right.
go right for the
Yeah.
U.S. player to win this game.
It sounds confusing, and it is in a way. When you first start, you're just like, oh my gosh, how do I keep track of all this? But eventually it comes to you pretty quick because, again,
Yeah, that that's the other thing that kind of struck me about it is that if you're just starting out and you're only playing this the first couple of times and you're not familiar with the card effects, then you're at a real
yep,
disadvantage. But once you've gotten used to it and you're more familiar with the cards, then you're like, oh, okay, I know that I shouldn't play this now because I know that that's got a partner that's coming later, and then if I play them together, I'll have a better chance. So I'll hold on to this. You start to make those types of
right, yeah,
decisions.
yeah.
So yeah, so that's kind
Despite
of
it
cool.
being a simple game and easy to get into, there's a learning curve to it. So when you're playing the solo side of things, you've got your cards, as I said, you've got a hand. You've also got 3 cards that you can play that are, I think those are the unique event cards where, like, for example, Thomas Jefferson, you can play that card and move 8 of your frigates anywhere on the board. They're very powerful cards, but once you play them, they're done. So you can't use them for anything else.
Right.
But the Tripoli side, the T-bot, as we will call it, as we're needing to call it, has a very unique way of doing things. So you go through this row of cards to see if any of these events apply. If they do, you play it. If not, then you go to this section where there's certain cards that dictate what the player does. So if none of those event cards apply, then you raid or build. And there's also
Right.
other effects too. So you got, as I said, the battle cards, and the Tripoli player has some. There's a lot of things that can happen that you might overlook when you're first playing that trigger these, and you don't know
Right.
to look for them. And then
Yeah.
later you're like, oh, whoops, that would have meant something. And
That's that definitely
yeah, me
happened to
too.
me.
Yeah, and that comes with experience. So you have to play it probably 2-3 times before you go, okay, I get it. I need to look for this. I need to look for that. I need to keep this in mind. It
Yeah. Fortunately, it plays pretty fast though,
yes,
so there's not a big investment of time in terms of playing
right,
it over and
exactly.
over
Even
again.
when you're starting the game, 45 minutes, 30 minutes is a pretty good, nice round number to estimate for play. So that's good. Um,
All
yeah.
right.
So that's gameplay.
You want to
Yeah.
talk about the rules?
So go ahead.
So we are looking at a 12-page rule book, so it's I think appropriate for a game of this length. Now, on the plus side, I will say that the rules are very clear and well organized. In fact, as I was learning the game, I was texting you and I was saying, "Hey, it seems that these rules are pretty well organized." And you're like, "Yeah, very." It's got a certain precision to it, although it doesn't. It doesn't. It's not got the kind of traditional war game numbering, nested numbering system.
Right, right.
uh, but on the minus side, the rules are pretty abstract. So as I was reading these rules, I'm like, okay, that's clear enough. But these instructions are clear enough, but I could use an example, and there wasn't any. I don't believe there are any gameplay examples or even like illustrations anywhere in the rule book. Correct me if I'm wrong on that
You
one.
are not wrong. There's
Yeah.
a few,
So I
but not
mean,
much.
okay. So what the missing link for me as a learner was, I'm like, okay, you've just explained something. It seems very clear to me, but it would really help me to just get over that hump to show me. And so I needed to watch a tutorial video. So I looked for Elizabeth Davidson, actually, Liz Davidson's
Oh,
tutorial video, and she shows you the
yeah.
first year. And she's very, very, she's very good because not only does she explain things really, she's a teacher, by the way.
Nice.
I believe she's a history teacher. So this is right up her alley. And Liz, if you're listening, and if you're not a history teacher, I apologize, but I know you are a teacher. But she explains it super well, and she brings it to life because she just has this command of the topic. And so that was what I was missing from the rule book, but that's what helped me. And I'm like, oh, and then I actually like copied the cards that she had in her hand, and then I followed along with her moves for my first kind of learning game. And that kind of got me off and running. So yeah, that was my impression of the rules. They're very clear, well organized. They could use a few more examples, gameplay examples, and illustrations.
Sorry, I was just looking at that. Her channel is Beyond Solitaire. If you're interested in checking that out,
That's
I
right.
was looking at her video actually
That's right.
earlier to brush back up on a few things that I was thinking I was forgetting. So it was actually an excellent playthrough video. I think that
Oh,
she is pretty
she's
good.
amazing.
They actually there's actually a YouTube video. Well, there's several YouTube videos actually. You can probably find them on Board Game Geek to help you learn how to play that. So, but still, you shouldn't have to do that in my book. If you learn a game, you should just be able to sit down with the book, with the game, with the book, learn it, play it yourself, and not
Mm-hmm.
have to go, okay, BGG, okay, Google, okay, how do we find this stuff? Because again, back before the internet, you couldn't do this kind of thing. There weren't people to ask unless you knew somebody who just happened to have the same game, which was a real rare thing back then. Um, so that's kind of a pain, but it's not insurmountable. It's pretty easy to get into once you figure these things out. But the thing is, if you're a newcomer to wargaming, if you're just starting to kind of get a feel for it, and this is your starting point, you're going to be that wall of text in the rule book is going to be a little off-putting, as Martin said. You're going to be used to full color diagrams and examples of play and that kind of thing, and a few extra pages in that regard probably would have helped, because newcomers to war games are going to be looking at these terms, and there's going to have all these phrases and things, and it might just be confusing. To me, it's not. I mean, I've done this for so many years, I don't even want to say, but for somebody new though, it could be a pain.
And that's kind of the audience that this
Right,
game is
yep.
addressing, right? It's for casual war gamers or people who have never even played a war game.
All right, so let's look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. Martin, would you like to kick us off with good? What are your goods?
Yes, so this game is I will just say this right up front. I believe it is a good introductory war game. It is a good introduction for folks who've never played a war game, want to dip their toe. As Michael mentioned, the subject is kind of a little off the beaten path, but it does have nice historical text, very clear, that really helps you understand more of the background. As far as the rules go, they are very concise, clear, straightforward, and this game, from a components perspective, clearly exudes labor of love, attention to detail. Just and I believe this is Kevin Bertram's first game that he's designed and shepherded from beginning to end. I was one of the early playtesters for one of his earlier print and play versions, and I was kind of compelled, sucked in by the wonderful artwork that he's got in there. So, as far as the gameplay goes, it is a game that provides some fast, light fun. There are a few tense choices of how to use your cards, when to use your cards, or when to not use them. It is another one of the stated goals is that it's supposed to be an educational game. It's supposed to teach you about this time in American history and the history of the Tripoli people, and I believe it also succeeds. And the last thing I'll say as a good is that it's a game that tells a story, and I appreciate and like games that tell a story. So those are my goods for this game.
Excuse me. I absolutely agree with all of your points. It's excellent component quality. Attention to detail is stellar. The passion for this topic really comes through. If you are a lover of history, if you like learning new things, if you enjoy just the experience of living history, you're going to absolutely love these aspects about the game. And like for me personally, when I play a board game, more often than not, it's about some battle or something. it's it makes
Right.
me. I like going into things that I don't know have a lot of knowledge about, because if I like the game and it's enjoyable and it provokes some thoughts, then I want to go look for books on the subject, and I want to do further study, and I want to learn about the history itself. And there's actually a book specifically on this called Thomas Jefferson and the Tripoli Pirates: The Forgotten War That Changed American
Mm-hmm.
History. And I bring that up because my mom was actually reading that. I saw her with it last year, and I was like, I got to remember that. I got to read that. And this was before this game even
Mm-hmm.
hit my radar. So this is kind of a nice little wrapping of gaming and learning about history. So the game itself, great for that aspect. I think it's a very underappreciated time period in American history, and making a game about it is just what a great idea. That's awesome. That's perfect. So that is my good. I agree with everything you said, as I said, and now we've got some bads to discuss. However, so Martin, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I do have some critiques about this game. I've mentioned already that the rules could have used more gameplay examples and illustrations or pictures. It's not a fatal issue because it is such a short and easy game. So the rules are definitely serviceable, but hey, if you want to get the stamp of approval from Solosaurus, you got to really nail those rules. And so you that's my feedback. Give us more illustration, more gameplay examples, and more illustrations. Um, I am annoyed by the level of randomness in this game, both in dice rolls and card draws. So combat is dice driven, and essentially for the U.S. side, you have to roll sixes. That's the only thing. You succeed on a six. And so your chances obviously on each die are 1 in 6, and I don't even know what the math works out to if you're rolling it. But anyway, you miss a lot of the time. There's a lot of frustration here, and there, but the T-bot succeeds on a 5 or 6, so instantly they have double the chance of doing damage to you, and they have more ships than you. Now, they don't destroy your ships; they just take your money, right? Which, as Michael said, it's like sometimes if you're unlucky, you're like not even finished with the first year, and you've lost half your money already.
Yep.
So it can be very the randomness can be very discouraging in the early game. I think there's ways to eventually ways to kind of mitigate that, and there's cards that combo and synergize with each other that kind of affect that. But yeah, I could have used a little more randomness mitigation. I am used to a certain level of randomness mitigation in dice driven games, and I didn't see a satisfying level of them in this game. I'll talk about the T-bot cards. So what they did here is they came up with a solo mode that reuses the Tripolitan multiplayer cards. But they have different effects that you have to look up in the rule book. You go to the back of the rule book, it's like, here's the different effects if you're playing the solo game for this card. So it's slightly different from what's printed on the card, which is, again, an extra step that had they only made a purpose, like a solo AI deck for this purpose, then you could have avoided that, have the extra step of, don't, for this card in the solo mode, don't follow what's written on the card, go to the rule book and follow what's written there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that was so that, I don't know, that made me feel like a little bit like the solo mode was a little bit tacked on, you know what I mean? And this is definitely a
Mm-hmm.
two-player game.
Mm-hmm.
I think, for sure, it's definitely. I think it's a lot more fun as a two-player game, although I haven't actually played it as a two-player game. And the solo mode feels a little bit like an afterthought. Um, Now, so there's kind of like a paradox with this game where um, to actually be successful at this game, you actually have to play it a few times and become more familiar with the cards, right? So that's good, but the more familiar you become with the cards, the fewer surprises there are. So after a while, you're like, well, I've seen everything that's going to happen in this game and every permutation of it, so I guess I don't need to play it anymore. So replayability is, kind of a question mark there for me. Like how replayable is it? You know what I
Right.
mean? So that's and then the last thing I'll say on the bads is if you compare this game to games like to other card games, kind of story driven card games like Arkham Horror, the card game, or Marvel Champions, or even Watergate, which is a game I mentioned earlier. Um, there's a feeling of being limited with the cards and the card play in your hand because basically when you're looking at your cards in your hand, you can either play it for the main card effect, or you can discard it and move a unit. Right? Those are really your choices. Or you can just like not play it and just keep it in your hand. But then the kind of drawback of that decision is when the year ends and the next year starts and you have to draw up back to your card limit, well, you draw fewer cards because you decided to keep something in your hand,
Mm-hmm.
right? So those are essentially the choices. And in other, so sometimes I'm like, okay, I've got this card here. The effect is not relevant because it's early in the game. I don't have land units, and this is clearly a card for land unit movement. Okay, so I'm not going to play it for that. So I'm going to discard it. But the only reason to discard it is to move a unit. But early in the game, really the only thing that makes sense to do as the US side is to blockade the Tripolitans, right? You're blockading Tripoli harbor. You try to make sure their corsairs don't get out, or if they do, you're going to shoot them, try to damage them, And then there's a couple of corsairs over at Gibraltar that you're trying to keep them there as well. So essentially, for the first year or so, you're not going to move. You don't want to move your units. So then why am I going to discard this card when I don't have any
Right.
units to move? So essentially now, then I have a wasted card.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And that doesn't feel good from a card play perspective. So, the reason why I bring up these other card games is because they kind of look at that from a game design perspective and they give you something else that you can do, something at least slightly positive that you can do by sacrificing that card that's going to give you some type of advantage. Maybe you get a resource. Maybe you get a token that allows you to affect a die roll in the future. Maybe you advance some type of track that gets you a little bit closer to winning. You know what I mean? Like, and that's not here. So, I'm going to wrap up here. my little monologue of bads here, but there's just I felt like they could have done more from a game design perspective in terms of more choices of how to use the card so that you never feel like it's just a wasted turn. Okay.
You're absolutely right. I agree with all your points, and I'm not saying it just to make it an easy podcast. You're absolutely particularly correct about the card deck. The solo mode, I think, should have had its own dedicated deck to that purpose. Now, interestingly, there's a board game called Space Corp done by GMT. They do something very
Mhm.
cool with the different era decks that you use. You have a deck you use, and then another era's deck is used to represent what the AI does. So there's a certain part of the card that's
Yeah.
just printed off at the bottom. You ignore it normally, but the AI uses that as its move. Something like that would have been great. I think you could have used the cards in that purpose without having to do a whole new deck, and if cost was an issue, then that might have helped with that. I don't know, but it really could use that kind of a addition. And if there was one, like a fan made one, perhaps I would be playing the heck out of this game more. I think it's a little confusing when you're like, okay, I got to start with this row. Okay, this doesn't apply. Okay, no, not that. Okay, is there 5
Yeah.
Corsairs in Harbor? Yes. Okay, so now we raid. Okay, so what do I do? Oh yeah, I got to do this. You know, just keeping track of all that is a mess. I'd rather just flip. Okay, that's what I do. Flip. Okay, that's what I do, and you're done. Um,
Right.
Being on rails, as you said too, there's quite a bit of conformity. So you're once you've discovered all the possibilities, you're not going to be surprised by anything anymore. And really, it comes down to there's a lot of games like that out there, especially war games that are classics, but still are on rails. So you're like B-17 Queen of the Skies or Target for Today or Target for
Hmm.
Tonight, all very popular games where you don't make any meaningful decisions. You just kind of go with the flow. You roll a die. Okay, look at this chart. Roll a die. Oh, this effect. Okay, that goes to this chart. Roll a die. That's all you're doing. Roll, 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 and it's all random. And people don't like that. But for me, it's almost like a narrative generator. And this game is kind of like that in that it's a narrative generator of this history. But as you said, there's only so many narrations you can have. So in a way, it's if you like it, if you like the period and it's interesting to you, it could be like a movie that you've watched many times. You're still going to get that enjoyment out of it. I love doing that myself. My wife doesn't understand that about me at all. Why do you want to watch this again for the 100th time? Because it's a good movie. you know
I thought we promised we weren't going to talk about aliens in this
how did you
podcast.
know I was
For
talking about
once.
aliens? Gosh, you're right. Yeah, that comes up in every podcast now. Anyway, yeah. So that's kind of a thing. I mean, if it's not to say anything bad about that particular system on my part, but if it's something that bothers you, you probably want to stay away from it for that reason. Then the Swedes as well. Just a little minor bad thing. The Swedes are really good because there's a card you play that brings in two frigates. They're Swedish frigates, and they help you
Right.
blockade Tripoli harbor. But that's all they do. So that you can roll with them to help you intercept corsairs coming out of Tripoli harbor to go raid and steal your gold. But they won't fight against anything. That bothered me a little bit. I don't know much about the history, and now I'm really motivated to want to learn more about it just to see how that is, because they're just kind of like, oh nope, that's your fight. Have fun. We're just here to intercept these little guys. We're not going to get up and shoot cannons at these big Tripoli ships.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, okay. That's I'm sure that's a game balance thing too, because the U.S. once you get to a point of having 8 frigates on the board, you're going to pretty much destroy everything you come across, unless you roll really poorly. So the randomness is a factor for sure.
Yeah, I'll mention this. There is a way to do story-driven games, where um, so I think that okay, the game that I'm thinking of is a game called Apollo 13.
Yeah, yeah,
Have
I
you
had
played
it. I
this
got rid
game?
of it. I know what you're talking about, though.
So I love it. I
Yeah,
love the
yeah,
theme, obviously, and so a lot. It's a very misunderstood game, and it got poor
yep.
reviews when it first came out, and that's pretty much what sunk it. Which is why I was able to pick it up for 15
Hmm.
bucks. But I love the heck out of this game, and I'll tell you why. Because what they did was they decided, that they broke up. So it tells a story of the whole Apollo 13 mission, from beginning to end. And your first playthrough, you are encouraged to play it, with these sets of cards, which tells the story pretty much
Hmm.
close to how the
Hmm.
history went. Um, and then the cards, the decks themselves are divided A through G, which correspond to different points of the launch and the orbit, and then the incident, and then the kind of tense challenge to get these guys home. Um, and it's got also a little bit of this like annoying thing that this game has, where it's like you can't win until 1805. So this card you just pulled doesn't, you can't play it until 1805. Sorry.
Right. Yep.
There's a little bit of that in Apollo 13 too, but at least they gave you more things to do with your cards if you're going to discard them in Apollo 13. At least three times more, as many things as this game does. So you could play it for its effect, or if it's not relevant, you could discard it. And there's a couple of different options when you discard. If you discard it and it's relevant to the current kind of age or stage, if you will, then you can put it on the left side of your board. Discard it to the left side of your board. When you accumulate 3 of them, you get this advantage, or this token that allows you to take extra turns. Or if you discard it to the right side of your board, then you get a different thing. So this is what I'm saying is, like, I feel like just a little bit extra, a little bit more options in terms of what to do if you can't play the card for effect would have improved this game. Would it have also, had to like essentially, mess up the history of the game? Yeah, but I think this is one of the things that as a game designer you wrestle with. It's like, because you could create a game that is so slavishly, bound to the history that it's completely deterministic, and you're just kind of like you said on rails, and there's no point really in
Mhm.
replaying the game. There has to be a certain level of player agency and unpredictable outcomes, and so I think that this game errs a little bit on the wrong side of that
Right.
line. That's how I feel about
That's a
it.
good point. You can also look at it like a roller coaster too. I mean, you've ridden roller coasters before. You look at it, you see where it goes, you see where it turns and dips and flips and does loop the loops. You can see it all. So you might be like, I see it. I don't need to get on it. It's more about an experience. So again, your mileage is going to vary depending on whether you want to experience that over and over and over again or not. Apollo 13 was a decent game. I got rid of it just because I needed to make room. So it's an excellent period of history, and it's fascinating to look into how things work, and it puts you into that role too. So like you said, some games work this way, some don't, unfortunately.
However, I will say that Apollo 13 had a really horrific
Yeah, it
graphic
did.
design, just
Yeah.
ugly as sin. That's my ugly. That was so ugly that the ugly for this game that I don't have, I'll devote it to Apollo 13.
There's another one you might like, and I'm sorry to hijack this, but there's another one you might like called Apollo. I can't remember the rest of the name. I got it in a trade, but I ended up selling it off. It is uh, essentially an Apollo mission to the moon, and it takes players and it gives you
Hmm.
certain roles. So you get a role as like flight commander. You got a role of uh, different roles in the game. I can't remember what they are, and you basically are tasked to say certain things at certain points. Are we go? Yes, we're go. You make these calls and determinations, and
Oh
it's
yeah.
it's very much on rails, very much on rails. But the production quality is really good, and it's very educational. And actually, it's a game that's presented in a way to be for students, so students can get a taste of this
Hmm.
history and how this works. So it's kind of cool in that regard. Um, anyway,
Nice.
so I'll stop derailing things by mentioning games. How dare I do that on a game podcast? I know. Um, so how about ugly? I do not have any uglies for this game, and it's got bads. We've
Yeah.
discussed that, but how about you, Martin? Any ugly?
No, no, there's nothing
Okay.
ugly about this game,
Yep.
and less. Okay, well, we can go to the next piece, and then I'll say this disclaimer.
Stomp discussion. Does this game deserve the stomp of approval, Martin?
So I'm going to, I telegraph my decision here. I'm going to say no, it does not deserve the stamp of approval. And my main issues are, lack of randomness mitigation, and rules could have used a few more gameplay examples and illustrations, and, just a few more game choices for player agency, so that I don't have as many kind of like turns where I just waste my card play. And I will say that I will categorize everything I just said as nitpicks, because I want to leave our listeners with the impression that this is really a good introductory solitaire war game, and for 1 to 2 players. And it's a very high quality production. It is worth spending your money on. Everything I've complained about here in this podcast is a nitpick, but it doesn't deserve the stamp of approval.
I would say no. Also, I think to get a stomp in my mind is that it has to hit on all cylinders. It has to be pretty much darn near perfect to get that. It's going to be something we unequivocally write off on and say, yes, you need to buy this. We
Mhm.
still say that though in this case. You're right. It's a game that you recommend. I recommend it too. It's a game I will get to the table again for sure because it's quick to set up, quick to break down. Well, now that I've played it a few times, I know what to expect and what to look for. I'm definitely going to play it again. But I think it has
Yeah.
a limited audience appeal just because of its time frame and because of what it covers. Not that that's a bad thing. Like I said before, it gets you interested in a period of history that you might not be aware of already. But people might be just scratching their heads like, Shores of what's that? That doesn't make any sense. Now, Marines, of course, will say otherwise because that is like I believe the first major engagement of the U.S. Marine Corps in history, and of course, I think every Marine or anybody who knows about the Marine Corps knows that. So that's definitely going to have some
Right.
appeal, obviously. But some regular casual war gamers probably not so much. But I still recommend
Yeah.
you buy it. Like Martin said, you should pick it up and give it a try because it's a good game. It's just not 100%.
Yep. Agreed.
So, next announcement, ladies and gentlemen, contest stuff. We had a giveaway in the last podcast for my copy of Viscounts. I said it right, of the West Kingdom.
Yay!
I got a word
Yes,
right.
Viscounts of the
Yay.
West Kingdom.
Uh,
But by the way, in the last podcast where Mike Kelly was guesting, he taught me that the publisher is named Garphill Games. I'd been saying Garphill for the longest time. It's Garphill
Garp Hill.
Games. So
World according
just correcting
World
myself
according
there.
to Garp. Do you remember that movie? Nobody
Garf.
recommend.
I do.
Nobody
I
else
mean,
does.
I do remember that. That was a
Yes,
really
it was
weird
very
movie.
odd. Oh boy. Anyway, total derailment there, ladies and gentlemen. So Viscounts of the West Kingdom giveaway, my copy of the game, which I unfortunately never got a chance to get to. It has been opened, so it's out of shrink, and it is, but it's completely intact, unpunched, unplayed. We do have a winner, and that winner has been notified. That is J. Elliott Casal of Pennsylvania. So J. Absolutely.
Congratulations.
J. Elliott, if I'm mispronouncing your last name, please forgive me. So congratulations. Stone Valley Games will be getting me shipping, so I will be sending that out to you as soon as possible. And thank you for being a listener, and thank you to everybody else for participating. We really appreciate it because the numbers on this one were even higher than the last one, which is excellent. And hey, let's keep that train going. What do you say? Because thanks to a shipping error on Fort Circle Games' part, I received 2 copies of this game, not one. So, with Fort Circle Games' blessing, we are happy to announce that we have the next giveaway in the pipe. We got a free copy of The Shores of Tripoli, new and in shrink this time.
Now that's
Absolutely.
exciting.
So,
Yeah.
again, we recommend this game. We think you should go over there and register. So, head over to www.stonevalleygames.com/shores. That's SHORES. We'll put a link in the description, though.
Mhm.
So sign up for that giveaway, and we will get that out in the next episode, I believe. So thanks to Fort Circle
Yep.
Games for letting us do this giveaway. Thank you for accidentally sending me an extra copy so we could do this. And thanks, as always, of course, to Stone Valley Games for not only handling the vast majority of review copies we get, but also for handling shipping to winners anywhere in the world. So don't let that stop you. If you're not in the United States, sign up,
Yeah.
give it a try.
You can get a free copy of Shores of Tripoli.
This wraps up episode 78 of the Solo Source podcast. We are part of the Dice Tower Network. For even more Solosaurus, join our post-show discussions and other shenanigans on Facebook at facebook.com/Solosaurus. Follow us on Instagram. Speaking of, is your daughter going to be doing anything for us on Instagram?
No update there, sadly.
That's okay.
So we're going to have a fallback plan.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's all right. At Instagram. Wow. Okay. At Solosaurus Podcast, or shoot us an email at solosauruspodcast@gmail.com. I think we said multiple times in the past, the quickest way to get our attention is Facebook, because we check that.
Facebook.
Yeah, we check that all the time. We're plugged into it. Instagram, not so much. I check email maybe once a week or every 2 weeks. So sometimes an email gets by. I've actually responded to a couple of people who wrote us like 8 days ago, and I was like, "Whoops, sorry, it took me so long to get back to you, but here you go." So,
hey, we got back to
yep, I will respond. We will respond for sure. It just might take a little bit extra time, but yeah, Facebook for sure is the quickest way to get to us.
On Board Game Geek, you can find us on the gaming-related forum, podcasts and blog subforum for Solosaurus. Even faster if you just go and search for Solosaurus BGG in your favorite search engine. And speaking of BGG or Board Game Geek, if you would like to have your very own Solosaurus micro badge, always look for me. Hit me up on Board Game Geek. My handle is Dr. Henry Armitage. That's Dr. Henry Armitage. And I will spot you the Geek Gold so that you can get your very own Solosaurus micro badge.
Perfect. Thanks again. for doing that, Martin. That's very generous of you. And thanks for Stone Valley Games for being our sponsor. As always, if there's any particular games you would like us to take a look at, send us an email, drop us a message on social media. Michael will go and work on his words and get his big boy spelling book out and maybe do better for next time. So once again, I'm Michael Eckenfels.
I'm Martin Gonzalez. Hey, thanks as always for joining us on Solosaurus.